Okay, so if you're feeling kind of defeated right now, like a lot of us progressives are after this recent, power shift in Washington.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about like what it all means for the causes we care about both here and, around the world.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is for you. We're going to take a hard look at some of the really negative things that are already happening under this new administration, both at home and globally. And we're going to zoom in on the impact on, the progressive agenda.
Yeah.
So we've been poring over official documents, legal challenges, expert analysis, you name it, and we've got a pretty clear picture of what's going down.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty, but knowledge is power, right?
Right.
So we're going to give you the rundown, the shortcut to understanding just how serious this moment really is.
Yeah.
And we're going to use this executive order targeting the law firm Perkins Coie as our starting point. But make no mistake, this is about way more than just one law firm.
Oh, yeah. This is huge. What's really disturbing here is how this attack on Perkins Coie, it's like a symptom of something much bigger and way more dangerous.
Right.
It's like they're trying to reshape the entire legal system so no one can disagree with them.
Wow.
And that has consequences for everyone, for global norms, for the rule of law.
For progressive causes.
Exactly.
So let's break down this executive order aimed at Perkins Coie. It's officially called Addressing Risks from Perkins Coie LLP, and it was issued on March 6, 2025. Now, the White House has given a bunch of reasons for doing this. Can you sort of summarize their main argument?
Sure. So their justification is basically built on a few key ideas, and to be honest, they're pretty flimsy. The first one they keep bringing up is Perkins Coie's representation of Hillary Clinton's campaign back in 2016 and the firm's connection to Fusion GPS, the group behind that whole dossier thing.
Right, the dossier.
Yeah. They're still claiming that the dossier was manufactured to steal an election. It's this whole narrative they keep pushing about a stolen election, which is totally baseless.
Right. It's like they're stuck in 2016.
Totally. And what's really insidious is that they're trying to delegitimize any legal representation of their political opponents. It's like they're saying, if you're against us, you don't deserve a lawyer.
Yeah, it's scary. So the dossier is back, and there were some other accusations too, right?
Oh, yeah. Their second point of attack is about Perkins Coie's work with what they call activist donors.
Okay.
Like George Soros. Specifically, they're talking about Perkins Coie's involvement in challenging election laws, like voter ID requirements, and they bring up this court sanction against Perkins Coie for what they call unethical lack of candor. But the thing is, these legal challenges are legitimate attempts to make voting more fair and accessible for everyone.
Right.
And the administration is trying to spin it like it's some kind of attack on democracy. They're calling it an attempt to judicially overturn popular, necessary, and democratically enacted election laws. It's ridiculous. They're basically trying to shut down any legal pushback against voter suppression tactics, which, is a huge part of the progressive fight for voting rights.
So they're twisting the whole idea of fighting for voting rights into some kind of anti-democratic plot.
Exactly. It's Orwellian.
It really is.
Oh.
And the order doesn't just stop at their political work. They also go after the firm's internal practices.
Right. So the third part of their attack focuses on what they claim is racial discrimination in Perkins Coie's hiring and promotion practices. They point to the firm's efforts to increase diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
Things like setting goals for hiring and promotion based on race and having fellowships that consider race as a factor. They're basically trying to frame these efforts as diversity, equity, and inclusion run amok.
Oh, wow.
They claim it's a serious violation of the public trust and shows a lack of respect for equality, but it's just a cynical way to undermine efforts to address systemic racism. They're twisting the idea of equality to attack any attempt to level the playing field.
So those are their justifications. Now, what about the actual actions that this executive order takes? Like, what does it actually do?
Well, it sets in motion a whole bunch of actions designed to really cripple Perkins Coie. Like, first off, it demands an immediate suspension of security clearances for anyone who works at the firm.
Whoa.
Yeah, pending some kind of review. But this isn't really about national security. It's about isolating and intimidating anyone connected to the firm. Just imagine the chaos and fear that creates.
That's like an immediate blow to their ability to do their work.
Exactly. And then it gets worse. It directs the Office of Management and Budget to identify and cut off all government resources and services to Perkins Coie.
Everything.
Everything. This could be anything from access to federal buildings to essential IT infrastructure. They're literally trying to cut them off from the government.
Wow, that's harsh. And it goes beyond just direct dealings with the government, right?
Right. It also forces government contractors to disclose any business they do with Perkins Coie.
Really?
Yeah. So now these contractors are under huge pressure to drop Perkins Coie because they don't want to lose their own government contracts.
Wow.
It's straight up economic blackmail.
Wow. It's like they're trying to make Perkins Coie radioactive.
Exactly. And it gets even more ridiculous. It orders the heads of all agencies to review and potentially terminate any contract with Perkins Coie or any entity doing business with them. And they specifically reference Executive Order 14147, which is called Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government.
Oh, the irony.
Right. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
They're using an order designed to prevent the weaponization of the government as a weapon itself.
It's like they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So they're also restricting their access and interaction, right?
Yeah. The order basically says to limit Perkins Coie employees' access to federal buildings, and it tells government employees not to really engage with them professionally, all under the guise of national security. And then to top it off, it makes it super hard for federal agencies to hire anyone from Perkins Coie. They'd need a special waiver based on a national security assessment. It's basically a blacklist.
They're trying to completely shut them out of the system.
Yeah.
So how has the legal community responded to all of this?
Well, there's been a lot of outrage. People are really worried. The Washington State Bar Association called it a dangerous strike against an impartial and independent justice system. They get it. They understand that this isn't just about one law firm. It's about the core principles of our legal system.
Right.
And the Seattle chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, they warned that if this administration gets away with this, it'll lead to even more attacks on the entire legal system, judges, government officials, anyone who stands in their way.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. And Washington Attorney General Nick Brown, along with some other state attorneys general, filed a brief opposing the order. They called it personal and political retribution and urged the courts to block it. They see this as an attack on the right to legal representation itself.
So a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And of course, Perkins Coie isn't just sitting there and taking it.
No way. They immediately filed a lawsuit in federal court in D.C. challenging the legality of the whole thing.
Good. And they had some early success, right?
Yeah. Thankfully, Judge Beryl Howell issued a temporary restraining order on parts of the executive order. She recognized that if the order went into full effect, it would cause chilling harm of blizzard proportions to legal representation. So this temporary block was a huge win.
What were some of the legal arguments that convinced Judge Howell?
Well, she identified several constitutional rights that are at risk here, like the First Amendment rights to free speech and association, because the order is clearly targeting the firm based on their client's political views and the firm's own affiliations. And she was also worried about Fifth Amendment due process rights, since Perkins Coie is being punished without a fair hearing or a chance to defend themselves. And then there's the potential violation of Sixth Amendment rights to counsel, because this order could seriously mess with people's ability to get good legal representation.
So it's a pretty wide-ranging attack on constitutional rights.
It is. It's not just about Perkins Coie. It's about the foundations of our legal system.
And there was a specific part about disclosing client information, right?
Yes. Judge Howell ordered the administration to tell everyone who received that disclosure request that they don't have to comply right now because of the temporary restraining order. That was to prevent immediate damage to the firm's client relationships.
So it seems like Judge Howell is taking this very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Both sides have agreed to speed up the legal process, skipping the preliminary injunction stage and going straight to the heart of the case. So it seems like Judge Howell wants a quick resolution, probably because she knows this is going to get appealed.
Right. Let's talk about the potential impact on Perkins Coie specifically. This isn't some tiny firm.
No, not at all. It's the biggest law firm in the Pacific Northwest with over 2,400 employees and 21 offices. They've been around for a long time and have a great reputation.
And they have a history of doing democratic political law.
Right. They were a top firm for democratic political law for years, involved in tons of election disputes and advising major campaigns. While their political law practice has gotten smaller since 2021, this executive order is still going after them for their past work. It's totally vindictive.
It's like they're holding a grudge. So they're being punished for work. They're not even doing as much anymore. And their lawsuit claims this could destroy the firm.
Yeah, they don't sugarcoat it. They say this order could literally put them out of business because they'll lose clients and business. Judge Howell even acknowledged that saying the president's actions were an attempt to intimidate not just Perkins Coie, but the whole legal profession. It's about silencing anyone who might challenge them legally.
This feels like a tactic we've seen before. They've done similar things to other firms.
You're right. This isn't an isolated incident. This attack on Perkins Coie follows similar executive orders against Covington and Burling, who represent former special counsel Jack Smith and Paul Weiss, which has connections to other investigations involving the president. A constitutional law expert named Hugh Spitzer pointed out that these moves are sending a very clear message to law firms, basically saying, if you go against us, we'll come after you. Even the Cato Institute, which is not exactly a progressive organization, is worried about this trend of intimidating lawyers who represent clients the administration doesn't like. It's a direct assault on the adversarial legal system, which is the foundation of our democracy.
It's really an attack on the idea of an independent legal profession. So what is Perkins Coie's main defense in their lawsuit? What are their arguments against this order?
They basically say that this executive order is a complete affront to the Constitution and our adversarial system of justice. They call it a bullying tactic meant to silence anyone who disagrees with the president. They emphasize that their lawyers are just doing their job, advocating for their clients regardless of their political views.
And they're making some serious legal arguments about the president overstepping his power.
Right. They argue that the order violates the separation of powers because it's basically acting as punishment for alleged misconduct, which is something only the judicial branch is supposed to do. They also claim that it violates both procedural and substantive due process because they weren't given any notice or a chance to defend themselves before these penalties were imposed. And they point out how ridiculous it is to punish the entire firm for the actions of a few individuals, some of whom don't even work there anymore.
Right. It's guilt by association.
Exactly. And they also bring up the important issue of equal protection under the law. They say that this order denies them equal protection because it singles them out for punishment compared to other firms in similar situations. They also argue that this is retaliatory viewpoint discrimination, which violates their First Amendment rights to free speech association and the right to petition the government. And then there's the forced disclosure of client information, which they say is another First Amendment violation because it undermines the attorney-client relationship.
And they're also challenging the administration's focus on DEI policies on constitutional grounds.
Yep. They argue that the order's vague and threatening language about prohibited diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives violates their due process rights. And finally, they say that this order infringes on the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights to counsel by making it harder for them to represent their clients effectively. This isn't just about one law firm, it's about the fundamental right to a fair trial and legal representation.
So they're making a strong case that this is a broad attack on our legal system, and they're also showing how this order is already hurting them.
Right, they're giving specific examples of the damage that's already been done. They say that clients are dropping them out of fear of retaliation and losing their own government contracts. They mention a major government contractor who'd been with them for 35 years and another client since 2018 who have both pulled out. They've also documented cases of government employees telling them that their lawyers shouldn't attend meetings. They say this is making it harder to recruit and retain good employees, and it's hurting their reputation because of the administration's false and damaging statements about them.
So their argument is that the president is acting like a dictator, overstepping his authority, and interfering with the judicial branch's role in regulating the legal profession.
Exactly. They're saying he's acting as judge, jury, and executioner, punishing them for things he doesn't like without any legal basis or due process. It's classic authoritarian behavior.
This whole situation with Perkins Coie is really a wake-up call. It's a huge escalation.
Yeah.
How do you see this playing out both globally and for the progressive agenda here at home?
This is where it gets really scary. We're not just talking about a fight between a law firm and the government. This is a major attack on the rule of law and the independence of our justice system. On a global level, it sends a terrible message. It says that in the U.S., if you challenge the people in power, they can use the government to punish your lawyers. This is going to give authoritarian regimes around the world an excuse to do the same thing, to silence their critics and crush any opposition. It's a disaster for human rights and democratic values everywhere.
And here at home, for those of us fighting for progressive change, it's incredibly worrying.
It is. By going after a law firm for representing certain clients and for supporting progressive causes, they're basically saying that anyone who challenges them is fair game. This is a direct attack on the entire progressive agenda. Whether it's voting rights, civil liberties, environmental protection, or social justice, so many of these fights depend on legal expertise and representation. If lawyers are afraid to take these cases because they're worried about the government coming after them, the progressive movement is going to be severely handicapped.
And the accusations they're making against Perkins Coie, challenging election laws supporting DEI, Those are core progressive values.
Exactly. And by attacking these things, they're attacking the very foundation of progressive thought and action. They're trying to create a system where only people who agree with their backwards ideology can get legal help without fear of punishment. It's a blatant power grab and an attempt to silence everyone who disagrees with them.
This is going to have a devastating impact on pro bono work, too. If firms are scared of the government, they're going to be much less likely to take on cases that the administration opposes, especially cases that help marginalized communities who are already at a disadvantage.
That's a very real concern. And it's especially worrying when you think about cases like the challenge to the transgender military ban, which Perkins Coie was involved in.
Yeah.
If law firms stop taking cases like this because they're afraid of the government access to justice for vulnerable people is going to be severely limited, this will just make systemic inequalities worse and undermine the very ideas of equality and justice that progressives fight for.
So let's talk about the justifications they're giving for this executive order. The dossier, the attacks on election law, challenges the attack on DEI. How should progressives understand these arguments?
From a progressive perspective, these justifications are completely bogus. They're just politically motivated attacks meant to silence opposition and consolidate power. The dossier claims have been debunked over and over. Legal challenges to election laws are essential to protect our democracy and make sure everyone has equal access to the ballot. And DEI initiatives are crucial for fighting systemic racism and inequality. So when the administration uses these things as an excuse to punish a law firm, it's a direct assault on progressive values and a dangerous step towards authoritarianism.
So given this terrifying situation, what kind of solutions do we need? What should progressives be demanding?
We need radical and uncompromising solutions. We need to demand a complete overhaul of campaign finance laws to get rid of the corrupting influence of big money donors and special interests. That means dismantling the power structures that this administration is trying to protect. We need to push for a complete restructuring of judicial appointments at all levels to make sure the courts are independent and free from political manipulation.
Those are some major changes.
They are, but they're necessary. And in response to these attacks on the legal system, we need to demand aggressive federal action to protect voting rights and get rid of all forms of voter suppression. The fact that they're going after Perkins Coie's election law work shows just how anti-democratic this administration is. And we need to fight for a strong and expansive interpretation of civil rights laws to combat systemic discrimination in every area. We need to push back hard against their attacks on DEI. The only way forward is through unwavering resistance and solidarity within the progressive movement. We have to defend our democratic principles and build a just and equitable society, even in the face of these attacks.
This deep dive has been a sobering look at the dangerous implications of this executive order. Targeting Perkins Coie is not just an isolated incident, it's a terrifying escalation that could have disastrous consequences for the rule of law. Our ability to hold the government accountable and the entire progressive agenda.
It's a scary time. This shows how little respect this administration has for the legal system and how willing they are to abuse their power to silence anyone who disagrees with them.
And that brings us to a really important question for you, our listener. If the government can use its power to intimidate and potentially silence lawyers who challenge them, what does that mean for the future of our democracy and for the possibility of achieving progressive change through legal and constitutional means? And maybe even more importantly, what is our responsibility as individuals and as part of organizations to resist these authoritarian actions and protect the core principles of a fair and independent legal system before it's too late? We urge you to look into the sources we've discussed and to stay informed and engaged as these events continue to unfold. We're in a dangerous moment and we need to be vigilant.